So, Adrian and Matthew, you guys are the writers of Coco, another hit in the Pixar canon. Talk a little bit about where the idea for this movie came from. How did it start?
It started back with the director, Leon Critch, in 2011. After he had finished Toy Story 3, he wanted to develop a new film, and the process of Pixar is you pitch a few ideas, and they kind of all exist at the same time so that you can bounce from one to another. But one of the ideas that he pitched that he loved and everyone at the studio really loved was a film about Dia de Muertos. At that point, it wasn't even so much a story as a concept of, answering this question. If you had the opportunity to meet the people who came before you, what would you learn? What would surprise you? That was enough to kind of start the research process and start the very earliest stages of developing the seeds of what became the story idea. And
yeah. I came in on less than a year later, but it was in early 2012. Lee pitched me sort of a nascent version of the story, and we worked with that for a few months. But then there was a lot about that story that wasn't going to work, and so we had to set it to the side and found ourselves with a clean slate again, and where to begin? How do you construct a movie? Well, we started with the holiday, and we really looked at the holiday and said, what is this holiday value? What are the tenets of this holiday? Who celebrates it? How do they celebrate it? And it really became the starting point for asking ourselves a lot of story questions. For instance, if you were to make a Christmas movie, you would sort of, if you've seen a lot of Christmas movies, you sort of know what the happy ending of a Christmas movie is like. Well, there haven't been a lot of Dia de Muertos movies, so we had to ask ourselves, what would the happy ending of a Dia de Muertos movie be like? And it would be the family would be together on both sides. It would be a wonderful family reunion where everyone would at last be together. And so then it became a process of reverse engineering. Well, how do we begin with a family that's not quite together, where not everyone is remembered, where not everything is spoken of, where the holiday might not be celebrated in the best way. And that's kind of where it started. Some point along the way, we thought, oh, what if you found out you were related to somebody that you thought was awesome and you never knew? And that became like that 12-year-old, what if, yeah, I would sneak out at night to go figure that out. And that's sort of, those were the germs of it.
And when did the idea of putting this boy's love of music, making that be a part of his journey, where did that come into it?
That was from the very beginning. Lee came to me early on, and he was very interested in making a musical and doing something that incorporated music to find a way to make a musical at Pixar, which, if that makes any sense, like the idea of doing sort of a stop and sing Broadway musical, we played with, but ultimately we're more interested in and more moved by films like Once and Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, that incorporated practical music into the storytelling. And so that came in from that was there from the very beginning.
Especially in a story about a kid who wants to play music, and where so much of the narrative takes you into these performance settings. We realized that it really lent itself to a kind of real world expression of music. Only more so, once we did all of this research in Mexico, hearing the different styles of music, hearing, the different ensembles, the traditional tunes, the more modern tunes, and especially because we're in this world where all of these eras are mashed up together, those elements started to lend themselves to a story where music in a performative sense becomes really important, but it's not necessarily the breakout into song, sing about your feelings story that earlier we had played around with.
So, I mean, when it comes to making animated movies and to writing animated scripts, the animators are involved right at the very beginning because, costs a lot of money, takes a lot of time to plan these things out. Can you talk about the writing process at a place like Pixar?
Yeah, for every film that we make, it's the writing and the story process are, always at the beginning of the film. And it's also the easiest, quickest, cheapest way to test out your ideas before having to put hundreds of people to work on them. And so, this is a film that has been in the making for 6 years. And the first 4 of those years was entirely dedicated to figuring out, who are these characters, what is this setting, what is this story, and how do we get from point A to point C.
Yeah, it's an iterative process. You do it again and again and again and again. You change one variable and see how that works. Then you change another variable, you see how that works. Draft after draft, treatment after treatment, index card after index card. It's a marathon. But with quick iterations, it feels like you're always sort of reinventing the story, and then eventually enough things start to lock into place. We were very fortunate, I feel like, from the first draft to have the ending that we have. Mm-hmm. I mean, the way the film ends, if I'm remembering right, is the way that it's always ended. And to have that as a North Star is one of the most valuable things that I feel like you can have when you're crafting a story, is to know the end. It's like you wouldn't tell a joke if you didn't know the punchline starting out. It's hard to tell a story when you don't know where it's all ending up. And so we were very fortunate to have an ending that was emotionally resonant and that seemed to capture all of these values of the holiday in one sort of cinematic moment.
Most of the film takes place in the spirit world. Can you talk a little bit about creating that world and conceiving of it, and how everything was going to work?
Yeah. I think that's one of the things, wherever we could, we wanted to lean into research to help to inspire and inform and give reality to the world and environments we were creating. The Land of the Dead, though, there's not a lot of research that you can really rely on.
No, we couldn't flatline ourselves and then come back what it was like.
But we did lean into a lot of things from the real world that allowed us to create contrast between the town that Miguel grows up in, which is very flat. It's more muted and dusty, warmer tones. The sense of family, the sense of community. Whereas to create contrast to that, we wanted to build this metropolis, this vertical world, this colorful, vibrant, celebratory night when everyone's excited to go visit their families. And a lot of that verticality and that color was inspired by places like Guanajuato. Mexico City was a big inspiration. Just the fact that there's so much history just in the architecture of that city, from the fact that it used to be, islands on a lake bed that has since built up, through the generations. Those became touchstones that spoke, if this is a world where everyone ends up and you've got multiple eras piled up on top of each other, how do we through the artwork take those ideas and give them form? And those were a lot of the big inspirations.
And another thing that happens here at Pixar, which is to me the coolest part, is that in the story room we can come up with an idea, and then concept artists will go and play with that idea and then bring something back, and then we can actually look at it, and that gives me another story idea, and then a positive feedback loop starts between art and story, and that happens so often in the early parts, and it was so necessary because of the world building that needed to happen, that our ideas kept plussing each other, and we were able to I think build it a lot faster than any one side would have been able to do.
You mentioned the research, and one of the great qualities of the movie is how it immerses you in Mexican culture. Can you talk a bit about that?
I mean,
it was, you know, in telling the story, it's kind of crucial. That's the promise of a film that takes place in Mexico with a Mexican family about a Mexican tradition. And, you know, one of the other things that was really wonderful about working on this film was we got the opportunity not only to research all of these places, but to work with a lot of really amazing collaborators, cultural consultants who, you know, helped to guide us and push us to really lean in and really, you know, make it feel like Mexico, to smell like Mexico, to sound like Mexico. One of whom is a guy named Camilo Lara of the Mexican Institute of Sound. It's his music project. And, you know, he would always come to us with, you know, this deep wealth of musical inspirations for the score and the source and the original songs that you know it when you hear it, and you know it when you feel it. And we wanted this to be a world that if you had spent time in Mexico, if you lived in Mexico, if you celebrated these traditions, are familiar and feel right. And if you're not familiar with these traditions, that invite you in and make you feel like you're experiencing the environments and the characters in real life. And, you know, the thing that allows you to have that sense of reality is the fact that in the computer we get to build everything from the ground up, and we can rely on the research, we can rely on the references, and we can, you know, we want to do that. We want to make this feel real for the audience.
And the only thing I would add, because it doesn't get talked about so much because there's a lot of emphasis on the cultural research, but we also did a lot of research into music and memory. Specifically with the elderly. The work of Oliver Sacks led us to a documentary called Alive Inside, and the work of a foundation called Music and Memory. Linking, the findings are that memory can cause these sort of awakenings in people with dementia, and some of the footage that we saw was so overwhelming emotionally that it really informed. Obviously it informed sort of the later half of the movie, but it also told us that this a movie about memories should absolutely be a movie about music too. That they're not, it's not arbitrary, that they are linked, that memories and music are the same thing, that music is what we use to tell stories and to pass along traditions, that it's all one. And so that was just another facet of the research. So it wasn't just all into the holiday.
What was the toughest scene for you guys to write?
For me, a lot of it was mechanical. That in terms of tough, like in the beginning of the film. The beginning of the film was always a struggle in the early drafts for me, because I felt like we had to teach so much about the holiday and what's going on and what day of the year are we talking about? What do the marigold petals mean? What is an ofrenda? What do we believe? Why? What's happening at the cemetery? There are so many facets to the holiday that finding the way to line up those dominoes so that they just fall uninterrupted was really tricky.
Not only just facets to the holiday, but facets to the family history. Like all of those things piled up on top of each other was a lot to wrangle, especially when you've got an audience who hopefully is just wanting to get lost in the drama of the film. The other thing for me that took a while to figure out is writing a 12-year-old kid is a little bit of a learning curve, only because like they don't use words to express things clearly.
Oh, whether that it were that I could.
And so finding ways to communicate what he's feeling, what he's frustrating about, without him having to say it, was something that took a lot of iterations and a lot of kind of, you know, trust falls with the story team and many just different iterations on finding that thing that motivates Miguel, finding the way how he expresses to his mama Imelda why he feels like it's unfair, the expectations that are put on him. A 12-year-old can't say that, so how do we communicate that? Those moments took a long time to figure out, but you know, working with Anthony, our amazing voice actor for Miguel, and doing a few versions, hopefully got us in a place that feels likable and natural and compelling.
And how do you two work together? I mean, how do you divide up the work that has to be done?
You know, mostly we worked consecutively. We worked consecutively as writers, but we did collaborate while I was writing. Adrian was on the project as a storyboard artist, and
so yeah, early on, Matt was writing the story. As a story artist, I would get his pages. I would draw up the pages into story form.
The time that I remember most clearly was we had it was about there was about 2 weeks where Bobby and Kristen, who wrote Remember Me, they were here. They're normally in New York, and we would work with them remotely, but they were here for 2 weeks, and we were all sort of in the same room, and they were writing a bunch of songs, and there was a story point that needed to happen. There was a song that they needed to write for it, and Adrian was going to board it. And that's when Adrian came up with this idea to tell story in the cut paper, in the papel picado, which obviously later became the beginning of the movie. And I just remember this sort of three-headed monster kind of coming together to craft a sequence of the movie that to me is to me, it's still the most beautiful and poignant. I wish the whole movie was in papel picado sometimes, because it was so beautiful and there was such an alchemy there. So that's just the time when I think about working with Adrian. That's the time I remember most fondly.
Yeah. You know, working on these stories is difficult, and you need to solve a lot of problems. And coming at it from a story artist standpoint, you know, there's certain things that I read in pages that I really appreciate, you know, when something is written very visually, or it leaves room for, you know, doesn't necessarily just rely on the words, but paints a picture, creates a dynamic that makes it very easy for an artist to draw. And so much of Matt's original drafts remains in the final version of the film, because that's the family dynamic. It's Miguel's problem. It's this fact that memory is an important thing, and that's where the movie is all leading toward. Those elements were always in the DNA of the drafts that Matt had put together. When I started writing in 2015, and that was a process of all of these versions we've done. Let's focus, shine a light on the things that we liked. Let's point everything toward our North Star, and you know, let's do the hard work of rearranging the Rubik's Cube so that you know, we avoid the roadblocks, and we just allow this really, it's a simple story that has a lot of complexities built around it, but let's, you know, let the beauty of the simple story shine through, but it takes a lot of work to navigate through all of the rules, through all of the character motivations, and all of the mechanics that you need to be able to get from, you know, beginning to end.
Well, gentlemen, congratulations on the movie, and thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much, man. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.